multitasking isn't actually real, at least not in the way that we've been taught. The research term is actually task switching between tasks and then calling it multitasking. The human brain actually cannot cognitively deeply apply itself to more than one task. Now, there are the exceptions of doing a rote task that you have subconsciously done over and over again, like walking, for example, and then taking on something that is a little more cognitively demanding. So walking and, for example, listening to an audiobook. Those two tasks can be done at the same time. Now, that's probably the exception to the rule. Multitasking doesn't exist. But you and I are task switching more than we ever have before. Is it hindering our productivity? But also, is there an opportunity for us to challenge how we think about effectiveness and efficiency? But also, are you in a position to reclaim your time and attention and challenge what you've been taught or what you've always been known to be true about attention? Welcome to this episode of the Unlearners podcast. The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. Research says that you and I can lose up to 40% of our productivity when we switch between cognitive tasks. So when we are trying or attempting to focus on more than one thing at the same time, 40% of your productivity is a lot in today's world where our productivity is so deeply valued. But get this, and you might have heard of attention residue. Attention residue is the idea that as you switch between tasks, it takes you, and according to the University of California, Irvine, it actually takes you 20 minutes to regain the momentum you had as you were working on the previous task. So for example, I'm probably doing something right now that's deeply cognitively demanding. I'm working quite deeply on it. And then I switch tasks and I work on something else. I lose 20 minutes because in those 20 minutes, I'm regaining the same levels of deep focus and momentum that I would have had previously before I switched over. So task switching, yes, as much as it is a huge norm and really just how we function, because imagine this, you're sitting working on something and then an email comes through. Maybe your emails are open in the background, an email pops through, you get a notification, it flashes on your screen, instantly your eyes dash to the right hand side. And you look and you check and you read at least the subject of this email. And there's a very good chance you're going to close up what you're working on and head over to your inbox to put out a fire, to respond to something that seems urgent but is actually not quite so. We're switching between those tasks. Now, as much as our world is highly demanding exactly that, because that's how we've measured productivity, right? Are you really as productive or as efficient, especially in the corporate environment, if you are not task switching? But also, who says you aren't? And you know from this particular podcast that the idea around unlearning is having a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. That means that you don't look at any one perspective, any one way of doing things with judgment, but you look at it with curiosity and then create your own hypothesis afterwards. So be exposed to various viewpoints, be exposed to various perspectives and ways of processing and understanding, and then go back and make your own decision. A mentor of mine once said, you don't want to read one book and be a follower. You want to read more than 2 books and then make your own decision. And that really is the big idea here, especially with such a controversial topic as reclaiming your time and your attention. I really want you to take some of the conversations we're going to have today and then go back your own sort of setup, or maybe your own agenda, or how you manage your time, how you manage your attention, how you manage your schedule and your diary, your calendar, and just rethink, is there a tiny tweak I can make? I often advise that we do one key thing. What's your one key thing that you can apply, that you can switch? So that's a conversation we're going to have today, because we do find, especially in our community of unlearners, that there is a conversation of being overwhelmed by our technology, by this idea of being always on, this idea of switching between tasks on a consistent basis. And so I'd love to, towards the end of this episode, and I really want to have this as the focus part of the conversation, is to give you practical insights and advice that will help you at least feel like you're regaining some level of control behind your digital life, and then having that then feed into your overall well-being as well. Because I think it's really important for us to start to question some of the assumptions that we have made, that some of our work environments are promoting, or maybe that we've brought in, right? And exercising some curiosity around that. So here's where I want to start the conversation. Then we're going to go straight into 3 strategies I'd love to share with you as you challenge what some of your perspectives are around reclaiming your time and attention, and how to be more focused and intentional when it comes to how you manage your energy, you manage your productivity. And what's the big unlearning there, right? What's the big idea that needs to shift? And for me, here's what it is. It's this idea of constant connectivity, and that it's essential for modern life, especially in high demanding work environments. And questioning the assumption we have around that. Do I need to always be on? What does being always on actually look like? And here's how I think about it, and I really want you to hear this. It's an idea that I learned, and I can't pinpoint exactly who came up with this particular idea, but it's been a huge favorite of mine for the longest time. It's the idea that there are, when it comes to our priorities, 2 almost different kinds of ways to think about priorities and how we manage those. So if you're almost thinking about the idea around work-life integration or personal life, professional life integration, is the idea of a glass ball and a rubber ball. So you almost want to imagine that different parts of your life, so we can have almost relationships, finances, intimacy, maybe things like learning, all of these various pockets of your life and how you express yourself in the world can either take the form of a glass ball or a rubber ball. Now imagine you are juggling all of these different things, which we all are all the time, right? At any given moment, you are juggling your mental health, you're juggling your psychological health, your physical health, your well-being in other forms. You're juggling a personal life, managing your personal relationships. You're juggling a career. You're juggling possibly a side hustle. All of these different things, right, that you're consistently juggling all the time. Now, the idea is, as you're juggling, some of these aspects take on the form of rubber balls, and some are actually glass balls. What does that mean? That means that as you juggle, and a few of them are in the air at the same time, you are almost needing to be conscious that some of them can drop and others can't. So, for example, if I say family for me is a glass ball, like I could juggle all day, every day, but I cannot drop family. And that means that whatever is happening in my life, everything else needs to stop, because family is a huge priority for me. I have to leave the office at 5 o'clock on the days when I'm at the office, because that's just a no-go. Family time starts at 6. I need to be home. I need to be with my family. I need to be with my children, whatever it is. And so family for you would then take on the form of a glass ball, for example. A rubber ball, on the other hand, would be something that I could juggle, and if it falls, I can pick it back up. It's not a big deal, and that's a rubber ball. For example, what I have heard is something like maybe a romantic relationship may take on a rubber ball for some individuals. So you can say, you know what, that's really great. But if I slip up on date night, or I don't show up with flowers on a birthday to surprise you or take you out for dinner or whatever it is, that's perfectly okay. I might have dropped that ball. I can pick it back up. Not because I don't care about the person that I'm seeing, but because for me, based on whether it's my personality or what I'm prioritizing at the time, romantic relationship is a rubber ball. Now, that might be you and you might relate to that. But the big idea is this, and this is probably the most important thing you're going to hear me say during this episode, is that it's all relative. When I have conversations with teams about work life, and I call it work-life integration, but work is a part of life. If anyone thinks that work is separate from life, it's time to unlearn, right? Because work is a big part of how we express ourselves, how some of us get to make an impact in the world and relate to other people. So work is life, is a part of life. Now, anyway, when I do have conversations, and I'm going to use the term work-life integration here for convenience, but when I do have conversations around work-life integration, a key aspect of it is that it is extremely relative and subjective. What is a glass ball and what is a rubber ball? Ours is just to be clear on what ours are at any given time, because they change depending maybe on the quarter, what's a priority at work during that time, whether hubby really needs you during this particular month, whatever it is, it changes. But also it's understanding your own, and then it's also understanding the glass and rubber balls of others, especially if you're in a position of working in a team, or if you are a leader, for example, or you're managing. It becomes really, really important to be managing expectations around what a rubber ball is for the next person and what isn't. Because oftentimes we find that there's the misconception that just because I say tech or checking my Instagram is a glass ball or is a rubber ball for me, it's not a priority, then instantly I will impose, and I use the word impose very intentionally here, instantly I will impose that on others. And when I see someone prioritizing or turning their social media into a glass ball, I will get super frustrated and then take my own opinion and expect the other person to live by that. And that is probably the biggest mistake we could be making. Ours is just to bring clarity around our own, and then to understand what it is for others. And should they need support from us, then we can always offer, that level of support regardless of what that looks like. But it's important to understand that it is very subjective, and especially in the context of technology and digitization and innovation and generative AI, and just a low-touch society that we are becoming isn't necessarily low touch as in we're not connecting, but it means connection looks different. It's changing. There's a shift there, and possibly challenging your personal assumptions about what you think connection looks like. Because for many of us, and we saw this quite a bit with the move reintegrating back into the office after COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021, is that most of us, 2019 actually and 2020, is that we saw a lot of organizations going, let's have everyone coming back into the office, with the assumption that connectivity and being in person are mutually synonymous. Or mutually inclusive. Now, that may be the case for some, but it's also not the case for all. And it's important for us to understand that as society develops and as society grows, meanings shift. And it's important for us to understand that maybe what it means to connect is different. It doesn't mean we're not connecting. It just means it looks different, but human beings are still able to connect. So that's a huge reframe that I think needs to happen right at the beginning. So go back, maybe really reassess where you are. When you think connectivity or attention, time, allocation, productivity, what are the assumptions that you hold around that? Where have they come from? Who has informed what you believe? But also, how is it playing out in your life? Where are you seeing it manifesting? But also, how is it impacting your capacity to show up? And what does that look like for you then? So you manage it very much on a personal basis, because that's the best you can do in this particular context, rather than expecting, everyone to sort of jump on board just because you have a set of programmings that you are playing with, right? That are informing how you operate and how you do life. So probably not the best news, right? Because Zanelli's going, oh my goodness, just mind your own business. Probably not what you want to hear. And I apologize for that. But really, I think it's probably the best thing you can do when it comes to a conversation around managing our energy and also navigating the attention economy the way we are currently seeing it. All right, so that's the big reframe. Let's get right into the 3 practical things that I'd like to challenge you to think about and then to try. All right, as you think about how do I now challenge my perspective around connectivity, being always on, managing my productivity, and finding what that means for myself, right? Redefining that for myself. 3 things. The very first one, let's get into the list and maybe take down a few things here that resonate with you and practice it, and then go over to social media and reach out to us at The Unlearners. We would love to hear how you're practicing these. Very first one is compartmentalize. Probably not the most exciting, but here's the idea around that. There are 2 different forms of communication, especially when it comes to the workplace. And this is probably going to be a huge aha for you, but for some of you, maybe not. Synchronous and asynchronous communication. So synchronous communication is communication that's scheduled. It's real-time interactions. Like you're speaking to me, I'm speaking to you. As soon as I finish off what I'm saying, you're giving me a response. We're moving ahead. It's fast. It's in real time, right? And examples of that might be sitting on a Zoom call, for example, or sitting on a telephone conversation, a cell phone conversation. Maybe you're connecting with someone in that way. Or in person, you meet someone at a restaurant. It's synchronous communication. It's synchronized because they say something, you say something back. Imagine standing in a restaurant. You've just seen someone. You go, hey, how are you doing? And they go, I'm going to respond next week when I have the time. And you're going, but you're here right now in front of me. This is not a deep question. But basically what you're saying there is that it's synchronized, it's on, it's in real time. I share a question, you respond with an answer there and then. So that's synchronous communication. But what happens oftentimes, especially in the work environment, is we confuse synchronous communication with asynchronous communication. This is a huge difference here that I really want you to note for yourself as you think about how to manage personal communication for yourself, how to compartmentalize when you are on and when you are off, right? So the second one then is asynchronous communication. Asynchronous communication or asynchronous communication happens in your own time. So synchronous is in real time, and this one is in your own time. Doesn't need to be scheduled, when you are available, when you can. So for example, email is intended to be asynchronous communication. I send you an email now. There shouldn't be an expectation, and I know there is, and maybe I'm quite wrong for using the word shouldn't here, and I'm going to take it back. But the initial expectation behind email is for it to be asynchronous. So I send it to you and then you respond when you can. You respond when you have availability, or, and this is probably the most important one, you respond according to the timelines and time frames that we both understand are appropriate, whether they're set up by the company, they're part of our team policies and procedures, or whatever it is, right? And so the asynchronous nature of it is somewhat boxed, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to ask you how you are now and expect an answer within the next minute. You are not here in my face. I have no idea where you are, what you're doing as you receive this email. Are you in the middle of something else? Hence, asynchronous, right? And so that's the big differentiation that I wanted to make there, is firstly understanding that various forms of communication, various forms of connecting, touching base with others are falling into at least one of those buckets, right? And sometimes you might find that the two overlap here and there, but you almost want to compartmentalize it for yourself. When am I always on? When is it appropriate for me to have synchronous communication? When am I ready to be giving responses on the fly, just like that, immediately? But also, when is asynchronous communication appropriate for me, relevant for me, the best thing for me at the time? And the second almost step to that very same idea is then manage the expectations of those you are communicating with, or who are part of your communication circle, waiting to hear from you, part of your, your network, in your workplace, in your team. Manage their expectations, because there could be an assumption, especially around your asynchronous communication, of a timeline, of an unspoken rule around your timeline. For example, hey, oh my goodness, I sent this email to you a day ago and still you haven't responded. And then it becomes a bit of an issue, right? Because there's an unspoken rule, an unwritten rule there around a time frame. And sometimes it is unwritten, but other times it is actually something that is in a policy of some sort within the organization. So really important, manage those expectations, but then be very clear for yourself as to when you apply each and what does each look like for you. So compartmentalize your synchronous and asynchronous communication. That's the first step, compartmentalize. Second is manage your energy management, probably the most important out of all the 3 steps I'm going to share with you today. So a few key ideas around energy management. This could look very different for different people. One of the ways that this could look is a digital detox. So you may have seen some individuals do a detox from social media. For the month of August, for example, I'm not going to be on social media. Don't expect me to respond to my DMs. I'm not posting anything. I'm just offline, completely gone. I'm just taking a break. Very, very relative. Works for certain individuals and may not work for others, right? That's one of the things that I've seen individuals do. Another one, though, that is a little bit more inclusive and is more of an idea than a practical set strategy, is boundaries. Being very, very clear on what your digital boundaries look like. What are your timelines? I have an app at the moment that I use on my phone that gives me only a certain number of times to access certain apps. And after that, I'm no longer able to access them. So it locks certain apps after a certain amount of uses. And then as I log into the app, or as I click a particular application, it asks me if I'm sure and if it's important. And that actually gets me to stop. I apply the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins in those seconds, where I go, is this actually relevant? Do I actually need to be opening up this social media app at this time? And then I might rethink it for myself. So be very, very clear on what your boundaries are. Are you offline at 5 p.m.? Is that something that's important to you? And then understand that your boundaries don't just serve you, but they also serve the other person, right? Because it means you're getting the best out of me, because I will be my best self. And then enforce the boundary. If the boundary is not enforced, it's as good as non-existent, right? It's one thing to say you have a boundary, but it's another thing for people to go, wow, that person has a boundary because I tried to do this and this is the response that I got, right? So the boundary is really, what are you going to do if the boundary gets overstepped? So that's another really important aspect there. And then the idea around integrating work and what we call life into the same category or into the same bubble is a really important reframe, because life and work are not separate. Life is what you do all day, every day. You've been lifing from the time you yeah, from the time you started breathing, you've been lifing. And work is just a part of that. Work is how you live out your life. It's one of the ways that you get to express yourself, one of the ways you get to make an impact in the world, one of the ways that you get to serve various groups within humanity. It's one of the ways that you get to meet really great people, right? And so how in the world can we say that work is not life or is separate from life? So just that key shift within our heads is an important one to make, to understand that work is a part of life. So how do I then become more intentional about how I leverage work in order to become my best self? Because work is contributing to everything that I am and everything that I wish to achieve and how I'm evolving and how I'm becoming. It's not separate from that. Otherwise, you'll wake up in the mornings and go, oh, I have to go to work. But actually, there's a lot more to this work than you think. Final thing that I'll say around energy management, and this is a little bit more practical here, is consider applying the 80-20 rule. Now, the 80-20 rule I've heard represented in many different ways, and you can apply it however you want. But the one that I'm referring to now is the idea that 20% of the tasks that you are working on during your day give you 80% of the impact. But then there's an 80% of the tasks that you end up working on that are probably not going to make the biggest difference and are probably not the best use of your time. This is relative. If you work within an organization or you're an entrepreneur, you're self-employed, it might be a little bit different from person to person here. But this rule I've found across the board to be something that does still stand. So 20% of the work that you are doing gives you 80% of the impact. So then what do we do about that? One thing that you can do is think about the 20% of your tasks that are really effective, that really move the needle, that make you super proud when you get those done, that make you feel like, wow, we've moved the business forward, I've moved my function forward, I've moved my team forward. That if those 20% of things get done, you will be a happy human being when you go to sleep at night.
Have you ever been to one of those retreats that when you come back, you feel like, oh my goodness, I'm a different person? Well, the unlearning experience is exactly one of those. Because if you go to the unlearning experience, you're not just experiencing a transformation retreat. You are literally taking 3 beautiful days, gifting them to yourself all the way from Friday up until Sunday, experiencing master classes that are powerful, workshops that will engage you. You are creating your journey and purpose for the coming year, taking stock of the year you are closing off. If you're someone who's transforming, the unlearning experience is for you. It's one of those retreats, and I'm not just saying this. This is the feedback we've received from previous retreat attendees, that the unlearning experience is life-changing. And so if you're ready for life-changing kinds of results, you're going to make sure you've got your ticket to the unlearning experience.
Now, what you want to do once you've identified that 20% of tasks is you want to focus on them. So you want to almost zero in on those and not apply task switching during the completion of those tasks, because they carry deep priority for you, or they carry the biggest level of impact. They are the most effective tasks to work on or to get done. And you want to do them one at a time. So instead of, like I said, task switching or overlapping them with other tasks, really zero in on these. Give them a focused amount of time where everything else is put on the back burner until I complete this. And some people might apply, when it comes to compartmentalizing, might apply different methods, and there's different models out there for segmenting the time within your day, right? So say, okay, 20 minutes of deep work, and then I might take a bit of a break, and then another 20 minutes of deep work. It's very much up to you. Manage your energy levels and then sort of take it from there. The very last practical thing, so we started with compartmentalizing, and then secondly we went to energy management, and then the very last one is carry out an audit. Carry out an audit, especially when you're about to start a nice significant chunk of time, and this is different from person to person, but I would definitely say every quarter, Map out what your glass balls and your rubber balls are for that quarter, and then revise that every month and possibly each week. So as you start your week, what are your glass balls going into the week? What are you going to prioritize? And by no means are you going to drop. It is a huge priority. It is something you're going to focus in on as you juggle. You may be juggling 100 different things, but these are super important for you. And then also, as you audit during these time frames, what are your rubber balls? What's a rubber ball for you this week? So that even your team, once you manage those expectations, remember, because you're going to also have conversations, even your team knows that, oh, for Zanele this week, she's, her glass ball is her mother, this week, because maybe she needs a bit of help in a certain area. Okay, cool. So the team gets it. If I get a call during a meeting and it's my mom, the team instantly knows because I've declared it. I've managed expectations. There's less likelihood of me creating some kind of friction within my team because they understand that this week for me, my mom needs something. So I'm going to have that as a glass ball, and maybe completing key work tasks this week is going to fall away, possibly because there isn't quite another huge priority or huge deadline during that week, or because my mom just really needs to take priority according to me, right? And my subjective perspective at the time. All right, so that's compartmentalize, understand where your asynchronous and synchronous tasks fall and how you're going to navigate those. Second, manage your energy. Understand where your peaks and troughs are in your energy. Some people have most of their energy in the morning. Me, huge morning person. I could live in the morning and then at night just sort of hibernate, do nothing. But I'm a huge morning person. And so even as I manage my energy and I set my boundaries and I plan my tasks around that, the morning time for me is for deep focus work. It's for writing, it's for creative work, it's for content, those types of things. And so manage yourself around your energy. But a big part of that is being aware, right, of where your energy is and then working from there. Third to that is carry out that audit. Don't jump into the day and let the day dictate to you what it's going to be. Prime yourself as you start a new month, as you start a new quarter, as you start a new week. Run an audit. This week, what's important now? What's a glass ball during this week? What's a rubber ball during this week? And how do I navigate that and then manage the expectations of the people I work with or the people around me? And what you'll start to see as you apply those three key things is that the way that you manage your technology, your digital world, this idea of always being on, is strategic, but it's also not hindering your progress. It's not hindering your productivity, but instead it's allowing you to focus in and accelerate your capacity to be effective in a world that is calling you always, right? Always trying to grab your attention left, right, and center, and demanding that you be productive at all things all the time. Because like we started the episode off, multitasking isn't quite what we think it is. You and I are switching between tasks, losing our productivity, and then losing all of this momentum, right, as we switch from one task to another. And so with those three key ideas that we spoke about that are super practical, you're really going to set yourself up for higher productivity, better, deeper attention, but also challenging what you've always known about productivity, the idea of connectivity in a highly digitized world, and make it work for you. All right, my unlearner, that's the end of today's episode around reclaiming your time, your attention, your productivity, right? And this idea of constant connectivity that feels like it just doesn't stop. Sending you hugs, sending you all the love, and I will see you on the next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now.